Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AWS Insiders Ask Us Anything. We are really happy to be here, and this is the first and hopefully a long series of live streams. Before we start, I'd like to thank our ASL interpreters, Stephanie and Rachel. It's really nice to have you with us. The idea of the show is an Ask Us Anything series. It's all in the name. We're going to have Rahul and I and a round of guest speakers with different experiences in all things cloud and AWS. We want to share some stories, some demos, some ideas, but the majority of the content, we'd like to be answering your questions and talking about real AWS issues that you're facing. And whether you're just getting started or you're very experienced and we just want to talk shop, we're here to be there with you on your journey. We've got years of experience amongst us. It's a really fun time we're living in, not just with on-demand compute resources, but all these higher level services just available at our fingertips. Before we get started, I'd like to do a round of introductions. So first, I'd like to introduce Rahul Subramaniam. Rahul, he's the CTO for ESW Capital. And this includes a whole family of companies, and he's also the head of innovation across these companies, and is truly a visionary thinker. He's the inventor of CloudFix, a tool that can scan your AWS account and find non-disruptive changes that can instantly start to save money. We're going to hear more about CloudFix later. Now, finally, Rahul is a self-described AWS superfan. Rahul, can you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And it's a pleasure to be here today at this Ask Me or Ask Us Anything live stream. I've been with this group of companies for almost 2 decades, and that's a really long time. During this period, we've worked very closely with AWS literally since 2008 and migrated or moved over 150 enterprise software companies over to the cloud. And over the last 2 decades, I have enough scar tissue to on me to talk about all the things that worked and didn't work as we made all these big transitions. So AWS is definitely one of the big passions and interests that I have. Apart from that, I am a Lego hobbyist and a 3D printing hobbyist, which I love to do in my spare time. So would love to have, a conversation about that someday. But we are here to talk about AWS and CloudFix today.
Well, the scope of anything, I think, can be expanded to include Legos and 3D prints at some point. Well, it's really excited to have you with us, and looking forward to sharing some of these war stories and experiences, and just talking about AWS. And next, I'd like to introduce Badri Varadarajan, and he's the CTO of a portfolio of products under the Trilogy brand. And he's been part of ESW since about 2019. And Badri, can you tell us a bit more about yourself, your experience with the cloud?
Hey, thanks, Stephen. At ESW Capital, my team owns the technical roadmap of 150 products. We start with diligence of products we're going to acquire or incubate. And the very first thing we do is to move them onto the public cloud and write a roadmap for how to add more valuable features for our customers. One of the things we do is we focus only on the technical merits of the products and do cost optimization after we've built products that our customers love. And I guess we'll talk a little bit about that today. That's an interesting journey for me because before ESW, I worked primarily on the network edge, deploying signal processing and inference engines, spanning telco and computer vision applications in different verticals. And one of the key realizations I had was even if you're completely operating at the network edge, you need cloud to still configure, control, and monitor all the products that you're deploying on the edge. So in a way, every company needs to have a cloud story. I live in Silicon Valley, so I guess we pay beauty tax, but I do get to go to the ocean when I choose to, and to the mountains. So that's great.
Oh, thank you for introducing yourself. It was great meeting you in person recently. It's all remote setup, but we luckily had the chance to meet in real life. And I'd like to introduce myself quickly. My name is Stephen Barr, and I think I have got the coolest job in the world. So my title is Chief Technology Evangelist. And it's kind of a funny combination of words. There's two main roles. So on the one hand, evangelist, it means spreading good news. In our case, we're talking about software, talking about our software and promoting it within the developer community. But at the same time, evangelist is also as much a listening role. So I want to make sure that what we're doing is actually what is needed, and that we're interacting with the greater community and just playing a part in that. And it's really exciting to be at the nexus of technology and innovation and customer success. And so like I said, it's the coolest job I could imagine. Let's see, personal background. I'm from Seattle and there now. Plan was originally to split some time between Australia and Seattle. Australia decided to hold on to us for a little longer, so we're making up for a bit of lost time in Seattle. All right, so why are we here? So Rahul, I wanted to ask you this. What do you see as the purpose of this weekly series? What are we aiming to achieve over the long run?
Yeah, so I think the short version of that is that we've built enough scar tissue around working with AWS. And because we've made such a big bet on it, and I think the world is making a big bet on AWS, there are loads of insights and learnings that we've had that we'd love to share with the community. But at the same time, I am hoping that with a variety of guests that we invite over to the Ask Us Anything live stream over the next few weeks, we get to learn too from their experiences. And I think that shared experience is what we want to accomplish. The longer version of that is that we made the big bet on AWS back in 2008. And we've had the advantage of learning along with growing with AWS. And I think that's something that a lot of newcomers into the AWS ecosystem are missing today. The sheer volume and scale of the AWS footprint can seem very scary for a lot of newcomers that are trying to get onto AWS and just try to understand this new cloud-native, event-driven paradigm of building applications. And that's something that we are hoping that we can help with easing the getting started process with. The second aspect is that 90% of the products that we have today or the code bases that are owned in applications today is basically utility functions. And what AWS has been doing diligently over the past decade or more is to take a bunch of these utilities and commoditizing them. And AWS has really changed the game on how applications can be built. And it's basically becoming the operating system of the future. And we want to talk more about that. We want to share ours and other experts' experiences around how they've been able to leverage AWS services to accomplish outcomes that historically might have been impossible to do. So the sharing and the learning for ourselves is basically what we hope to accomplish through this series.
Oh, well, thank you. And I could definitely appreciate what you're saying about just on the one hand, we get to stitch together all of these complex services. I was playing with the transcription of a phone call recently. And so AWS has this really neat service which could take a recording of a phone call between a customer and an agent, and it'll give you word by word, sentence by sentence, syllable by syllable, actually. It'll tell you what's being said, but not just that, what was the intent of the conversation? What are the action items? What's the sentiment in all of those things? And that would have been phenomenally hard to put together just a couple of years ago. It still would be hard. But now you can just literally drop an MP3 into an S3 bucket, and in a couple of seconds, you've got this full analysis, and you can plug that into an analysis pipeline. It's really exciting, the size of the building blocks that we get to play with. We're not just writing, I hope maybe they are at some other place that they're still reversing linked lists as an exercise, but we get to play with these huge building blocks where we're doing really exciting work. And well, it's great to have your 10,000 foot perspective here. All right, so before we get started with the contents, again, I just want to thank everyone who's joined the stream. Again, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitch, and we're on Twitter. And please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we see them. And also, if you want to do a our hashtag AWS or hashtag CloudFix, we're keeping track of those. We're going to give away a CloudFix hoodie a bit later, and so your comments are what for each. As you comment, we aggregate all the usernames, and we'll do that drawing at the end. And again, thank you to our ASL interpreters, Rachel and Stephanie. I really appreciate that. And please let us know what else we can do to make this as accessible as we can. All right, so now we're going to transition to talking about CloudFix. So I'm going to play a little video, and then we'll get started with that.
AWS is a critical part of your business, but managing what you're spending on AWS is a pain in the, well, you know what we mean. It's true. 20% of cloud spending is just flat out wasted. Meet CloudFix. We've optimized over 45,000 AWS accounts with zero downtime and no performance degradation. And we saved companies more than 20% on AWS costs. No BS. CloudFix is aligned with the latest AWS cost optimization guidelines and savings plans. So you know our recommendations are legit. And the CloudFix AWS cost optimization engine is fully automated. Simple to use, no IT time or resources needed. Installation? 5 minutes max. CloudFix does the rest with just one click. It's as simple as find, fix, save. The road to AWS cost optimization is ahead. Start your test drive of CloudFix today.
All right, so that is our 1 minute CloudFix. Now let's dive into it. So, Rahul, can you give us the backstory? Where did CloudFix come from?
Yeah, so one of the consequences of having over 150 companies in the portfolio is that you aggregate a whole lot of AWS accounts over a period of time. There was a time a few years ago where we had over 45,000 AWS accounts that we had to manage. And for those of you who are not familiar with that number, it's insanely large to the point that AWS themselves cannot put 45,000 AWS accounts under one master payer. We actually needed to have 5 separate master payer accounts and categorize, at 10,000 accounts each across these master payers. We suddenly found that our cost structures were literally blowing out of proportion. And so the first thing that we did was we went out and looked at every tool in the market that would help us solve our cost problems. Initially, it was really exciting because a lot of these tools, were telling us that we would easily save 50 or 60% on our AWS spend, and that was really exciting. So we put together a SWAT team, and we started going after all these savings. Unfortunately, we found very quickly that we were making absolutely no progress, and the reasons were a few. Reason number one was that most of these tools gave us really nice visuals. They gave us the equivalent of Cost Explorer, where we could slice and dice the data around our accounts and figure out where we were spending money. But realizing the savings was really our problem. None of these tools actually realized the savings for us. Problem number two was that more often than not, a lot of these savings required massive open heart surgery on your applications. And we could never get all members of our engineering teams, product management teams, DevOps teams to agree about the changes that needed to be made. And therefore, we never really managed to realize any of those savings. So after a bunch of failure trying out a lot of these tools in the market, we decided to take a step back and rethink how we would go tackle these problems. And it boiled down to something very simple, where we started looking at every AWS recommendation that was being made around optimizing costs. We filtered them down to the ones that were completely non-disruptive in nature. That means ones that wouldn't require to restart an instance, ones that did not require to change your application code, ones that did not require you to even change the configuration of your deployment, things that were completely non-disruptive, that you didn't need permission of your teams to get going because, again, everything just continues to work as is. So we just took some of those and started automating these particular fixes, and we started rolling them out across all of our accounts. Over a period of time, as we started talking to a lot of our customers, we realized that they had the same problem that we were having. And so sometime last year, we made this product available externally to our customers and to the rest of the world.
Oh, well, thank you so much for explaining that. We really, really appreciate it. And it is fascinating how you start playing with the cloud and it's really fun. Then you look at the bill and you say, wow, okay, let's rein this in for a moment. But it's a complex thing in and of itself. And also, we've got some great comments in the chat. I love when you mentioned that 45,000 accounts. We're having the signal says, I'd say that's certainly a few accounts. I know just when you said that number, I instinctively just reached for my coffee cup. Oh my gosh, 45,000. All right, well, that's pretty neat to think about that. Oh, and we got a great question about multi-cloud. So we're going to save that for the third half of the show. Looking forward to seeing that one. Badri, I've got a question for you. So what are the hidden costs that you've seen in typical AWS deployments?
So yeah, I mean, I think Rahul alluded to this earlier, right? When you when people start their cloud cost optimization journey, you can start with the tools that the cloud providers themselves give you. Just get a sense of like, what is it you're spending money on? And I can even share my screen and show you the AWS tool for that. That's Cost Explorer.
All right, we're getting this screen share set up.
Yeah, you see this?
It should pop up in a second here. Not quite yet.
Okay.
And while we're working on that,
for our audience here, we are completely new at this, and we are still figuring out all the technical issues around how we do this. Again, tips and tricks around this would also be welcome from the audience.
And then the comment from the signal that said, I love that you guys solved our own problem. I really like that about the company culture of really digging in and being introspective and figuring out, okay, well, what do we, because the things that we're doing are at scale. And so being able to be introspective and then take that solution and generalize, say, okay, how do we solve this? Not just for us. Now that we've solved it for ourselves, can we solve this generally? And I'm certainly other people can benefit from that work. All right, I think we might have to punt on the screen share.
Yeah, let's punt on the screen share. We're going to talk through this. So when you start with this, you'd first want to get a basic sense of like what you're spending money on, and do it by services first. What we find with most of our customers is they spend about 30% on EC2 instances. Then the next big category tends to be storage to block store. That comes under EC2 other in AWS for some weird reason. And S3, which is object storage. And that's where most people are in their cloud journey. They've basically taken a bunch of on-prem stuff, they've hosted it in the cloud using the layer 1 services that AWS or any other cloud provider provides. And talking of hidden costs, you can save a bunch of money simply by finding out what's unused and turning it off. And that number actually is surprisingly high for lots of folks. It's 10-15%. And Rahul was talking about the 45,000 accounts earlier. One of the things you want to do is to go and tag not thousands, but probably hundreds of thousands of resources. And simple tricks work. Basically, you can tag it by, I think the first order thing you want to do is to categorize your accounts themselves. What is production? What is non-production? That sort of thing. And by doing that and turning on some aggressive policies in non-production in terms of turning off untagged resources, you can get 10, 20% there, but it takes a bunch of manual work. And that's where our insight into CloudFix, and I think Rahul will talk about that more, is there are things you can do without all that tagging, without all that potential performance impact, that will still save you 10%, completely automated. And that was the insight that led to CloudFix, the product.
All right. Yeah. So to summarize, we think tagging, also understanding the basic breakdown and understanding what's our dev cost, what's our prod cost, instead of just looking at it as one big bucket. Okay, so then I guess one of our follow-up questions was, if you're just getting started, I guess, but you really addressed that already, understanding your costs. And so the next one is building the plan. And so I think you
correct.
Yeah. On building the plan for once you know where your costs are going, how do you execute on that?
So one thing that we find useful is if you just try and build a plan in a vacuum, you sort of get confused. It's good to sort of start with goals, and there are some good goals to keep in mind. You can eventually get to 50% cost reductions in almost all cases, unless you've already done a whole bunch of optimization. If you just started on your cloud journey, your target is 50 to 90% of your costs can be reduced. That's where you need to go. But you don't start by saying, I'm going to solve that first. You take it 10% at a time. That's a good way to do it. Turn on something like CloudFix that basically does the automatic no regret stuff. That'll get your easiest 10%. Then you look at the next easiest thing tends to be reservations, like pure financial engineering. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit in depth later. But that will give you another 10 to 20%. That's a good thing to try and spend time on, because you don't have to impact your customers or your engineering teams. All you're doing is forecasting properly and making reservations. And then you can start these sprints that get you somewhere between 30 and 60%. That's sort of application dependent. And sprints are actually a good way to do it, because you sort of time bound everything, you scope bound everything, and you only look at what's important.
Oh, thanks for that answer. All right, so first you do CloudFix, and then you look at kind of financial ones of the reserved instance versus on-demand, and then you do targeted sprints to target specific things.
I'll add one other thing with that particular note from Badri. I think there is a tremendous amount of savings to be had by just shutting off machines that you don't use anymore. In general, I think over the last 15 years of experience working with all kinds of different accounts in AWS, I think that's the number one area that you can get started with, simply because it's easy to do. And it's one of the things that everyone misses. It's just so easy with a simple API call or just log into the console to just turn on a machine. And no one ever pays attention to shutting them off. The cost per hour shows up as a fraction of a cent, on a lot of instances and resources, and it doesn't feel like much. But when you leave tens of thousands of these resources on without remembering to turn them off, they add up to a lot of money. So I'd say start with just looking at stuff that you can shut off, and then you can start with the rest of the stuff that Badri was talking about a few minutes ago.
That makes a lot of sense. If you have an EC2 instance that's your personal dev box that's sitting there, you're only going to work 8, 10, maybe 12 hours. Hopefully not, but maybe 12 hours in a day. That's still 12 hours of idle time where, like you said, a simple API call can stop that instance while you're not using it. And that lets you regain that reserve capacity, and you regain that cost.
That brings up an interesting war story that we were just talking about last week with Badri. And I just like to bring that up, which is, so back in 2008, 2009, AWS didn't have IAM. So when we had all of these users, we had to build a system of our own that basically acted as IAM that would allow multi-tenants or multiple users to access resources within the same account. And one of the very early on automations that we put in place was that every user had to put in their working hours in the system that said, I work these 8 hours in a day. And we would automatically go shut off those instances or put them in hibernate mode so that we weren't wasting 16 hours of compute time just because a user was using it only for 8 hours in a day. And that makes a big difference. That's 66% cost reduction on every machine that everybody launched. And here I'm talking about 14 years ago. So it's just a discipline that you need to build from the get-go. And that makes a big difference to your cost and your bills as well.
We're getting some great feedback on that. That's some great savings. And speaking about discipline, another war story. A long time ago, and luckily you're protected from this type of error, I accidentally committed some keys to a public GitHub repository, and my AWS account very quickly turned into a massive Bitcoin mining cluster. That was my scariest AWS bill experience, and luckily we were able to rectify that very quickly. I could not afford to maintain the cluster that these folks had started on my behalf. We got a great question from the audience here. Let me post this up. For someone who's just getting started out and doesn't know what their costs are going to be, are there smart suggestions for what to turn off based on predicted usage? So are we doing, I guess you alluded to that earlier, but do you have any more to say about that?
Badri, you want to take that?
Yeah. So the Cost Explorer tool does have cost forecasting, but I think we want to start with some really simple rules. Like to Steve's point, is actually a really good one, which is about Bitcoin mining. You want to turn off P4 type instances in all your non-prod accounts. Basically, service control policies are your friend. They're not intended to be very detailed or anything. You only get 5 service control policies per account. I'd go turn off everything that's untagged. That's a good service control policy. The other one is specific kinds of instances. Just block them. You can do something with regions. If you're just getting started out, you're probably just going to use one region. You're not going to use all regions. So just turn them off. Don't use anything there. And in general, if you're really starting a new project, you should start with something serverless, if at all possible, because that way you're paying for use. To Rahul's point earlier, most of your cost is going to be an EC2 instance or an RDS instance somebody turned on and never used.
Yeah. There's one other factor which I see very common, or I've seen very commonly, which is for someone who's just started out, let's say you kickstart a new account, you start working with it, very soon you start hitting API limits or different resource limits on that particular account. And there's a general tendency to over-provision those limits because you're like, well, I don't want to keep filing support tickets to get these limits raised. But I'd say keep them conservative. Do not try to, if you need 5 machines, don't turn it into 20 machine limits, because those are things that come and bite you later. And you want to avoid, you're creating very open limits. Think of it almost like your credit card limit. If you have a high credit card limit, you are likely to spend more. So just like your credit card, keep your credit limits conservative so that even in the worst case scenario, you have certain checks and balances in place. And like Badri was saying, service control policies are really awesome. Use them. The other way that you can actually get around the limitation of 5 service control policies per account is by splitting out your resources across a few accounts. And that way, in case you have, problems like a key getting, exposed or something going wrong with a particular account, you can keep your resource limits fairly tight within that account and limit the blast radius of any runaway costs within just that one set of resources instead of letting it affect, one account that has everything in it. So those would be my two other pieces of advice.
Yeah, actually, I agree with that. I mean, focus anytime you can focus your attention on a small set of things, that would really help you. So you can focus it by account. There are three axes which are useful. Accounts is one, services is another. That's where you start with looking at which services you're spending money on. I'd even go, if you're getting started and if you can get away with it, then do a nuclear service catalog. Don't permit anybody to spin up a service that you're not explicitly authorizing them to do. And the third one is application level focus, but that's a little bit harder because applications are more complex beasts and you need to involve large engineering teams to drill down into application level costs. But services and accounts should be something that you can do at the IT level, and it'll save you a lot of money.
I really like that idea, which is limiting the blast radius. I remember the first time I launched a really big cluster, I had this for loop. And I said, okay, this is going to run. It's going to start 600 instances. I really want to make sure this is doing exactly what I think it's doing. Especially at the time, I was a broke graduate student. I really couldn't afford to make this mistake. So limiting this blast radius, that's a really good idea. And like I said, don't have that credit card with this huge limit on it. At some point, you're going to hit that limit. All right, we have another question. We talked about serverless. Let's talk about this one. In terms of stacks and getting started with AWS, if you were getting started today, what would you start with? Would you go serverless? Would you just start an EC2? Rahul, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this stack has changed and over the last few years, and it's continuing to evolve and change. I think serverless is the way to go. And even within that, it's changing quite a bit. So just, a few months ago, I would have said doing something like RDS with Lambda and API gateway to, front it. And, if you really needed S3 CDN for any front end that you're building, that would be the basic stack to go with. My view on that has changed just given all the stuff that's happening. If you're primarily building a very transaction-oriented application, a better bet would probably be something like DynamoDB with Lambda, and you would probably leverage Lambda URLs. You probably want to look at something like Amplify Studio to build up your UI and front end, and you could model your backend within Amplify Studio as well. And the sheer number of tools that AWS is coming up with every year, this is an area that's constantly going to change and evolve. There's lots of very exciting new serverless stuff that's coming up. And we couldn't be more excited to see where that's headed. If you're dealing with, say, certain areas of ML, you basically, there's tons of stuff coming up around SageMaker Studio or around that world. There is also the AWS Glue Studio that helps you do a bunch of ETL and data transformations, and that's pretty neat to get started with right out of the box. There are a lot of serverless tools now in the AWS portfolio that you should go explore. But this space is constantly evolving. And again, it is really cheap. That cost to get started is, I find, every year keeps coming down. What used to be $100 is probably $80 now. If you got started with something like DynamoDB and Lambda URLs, it would probably be under $10 depending on how much data you actually are going to put into the system.
I really like that perspective of starting with serverless and then letting AWS deal with the margins and the excess capacity. I think it's almost similar to what you're saying about the kind of over provisioning your account, right? It's easy to just think scale right out of the gate. Then you think, no, I'll just think serverless and let AWS deal with that. Is a much easier way, right? It's fun to think about, the API that I'm writing is going to need to handle 1 million requests per second. But even if it does, you still leave that to AWS and instead of trying to engineer your own solution. All right, here's another user's a viewer submitted question. Let's look at this one. Clients tend to see the most cost savings, or what clients tend to see the most savings through these optimizations? And can we share any specific situations about cost savings, any stories about cost savings and their outcomes?
You want to take this one, Badri?
Sure. What clients tend to see the most cost savings? That's a good question. There is also a meta question, which is what are people actually spending money on anyway in AWS? And it's surprising how often the same pattern repeats. You could almost sort of blindly make this bet on, take anybody's bill, I can do an over-under on it. It's going to be 40% EC2s, 30% EBS volumes, 20% S3, and then 10% of them just getting started with managed services, right? I'm sorry, I said EBS, but really that's storage, that's databases. Out of these, where do people really save money? They save a whole bunch of money on storage, because that's the place where AWS has invested a whole bunch of tools in cost optimization. And really, all you have to do is to just turn them on and configure them properly. Cloudfix does a bunch of that. Actually, we have a bunch of advisories that do that can't quite be automated, but you should do it anyway. The compute savings, that's 40% of your bill. So anything you save there is a big chunk of your bill that goes away. Focus on reservations there. Folks who are paying anything on demand at all are the ones who save a bunch of money when they start this journey. Your aim should be to pay $0 on demand. This is sort of in terms of setting stretch goals, right? When you start that journey, you look at Cost Explorer will give you an option to look at your cost by purchase option. If you see an on-demand spend there, that's money that you're throwing away. AWS has a bunch of tools such as savings plans, convertible instances. Basically invest in them. There's a little bit of a fear of estimating demand, and I think we can talk in detail about how that's kind of misplaced fear. And you should go spend some time getting those costs down. Once you get into managed services, it's a little bit more complicated to save money, but there are easy savings there in terms of trying to use cheaper instances like Graviton instances for almost every single service pattern. But essentially what I'm getting at is where you can save money is strongly correlated with where you're spending money. And that really goes to storage, it goes to EC2s, and then just where you're running your managed services on. I think the next level is trying to get into enterprise discount plans and so on. I think Rahul has lots of insights on that stuff.
Yeah. But before I jump on that, I think there's another way I look at this. There are basically three dimensions of where things are changing, right? Number one is AWS is constantly coming up with a whole lot of new services that make some of the older services or resources, they make them look more expensive, because that's AWS's mechanism. So back in the day, if you were an early adopter of AWS services, what AWS would do is year over year, or literally every quarter, they would reduce the prices of their existing resources, and you could basically stay on the same resource and it would just keep getting cheaper year over year. They stopped doing that about 7 or 8 years ago, and instead they started creating these new services. Okay, so for our new resource types, very recently, for example, AWS released a new EBS volume type called GP3, right? That made the older de facto GP2 volumes kind of look worse, because the new GP3 volumes were more performant and 20% cheaper than the GP2. But AWS doesn't switch them over for you. You have to do that, and AWS will give you guidance on how to do it, but they don't switch these resources over for you. So where there are these new set of services or new resources that are being created by AWS, and if you've been a user of AWS services for a while, there's a bunch of savings in moving to the latest and greatest versions of those resources, because they are almost always going to be cheaper and more performant. So if you actually look at the price performance of the newest resource types, they blow all the old ones out of the park. So you want to kind of get there. So customers who've been on AWS for a while, there's tons of savings on that dimension. The second one is where there are customers who have they're constantly working on a lot of development activity. They're moving in new workloads into AWS. When you're constantly moving new stuff into AWS, things aren't optimized at the get-go. So there's a lot of cleanup. There's a lot of optimization that can happen and does happen over a period of time, right after the movement into AWS has happened. And that's the second dimension where a lot of the savings come in. So folks who are just moving in, after they've done lift and shifts, after they've done basic movement into AWS, you do a bunch of optimization. That's the second dimension. The third one is that tools like Cloudfix are constantly adding new fixes from the recommendations that come from AWS, in which case there are new kinds of resources, there are new kinds of insights that they go and seek and are therefore able to realize a lot of savings just because of the new recommendations, new tools, like Badri said. There are a bunch of tools that AWS creates for you to save money. S3 intelligent tiering is a perfect example of that, where they've done all the heavy lifting to figure out what the age of your objects in S3 storage are, and all you have to do is turn it on. If you turn it on, your cost of storage of objects in S3 could be as low as 90+%, right? If you go to deep archive or dish archive. Of course, you have latency penalties in those cases, but there are scenarios where there are two infrequent access layers where there are absolutely no latency penalties on it, and it could still be 60% cheaper to move to those infrequent access tiers. So AWS does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, and you need tools to be able to just enable those for your accounts, your resources, and tools like Cloudfix do that. And as we get more insights, we just automate that for you. So that's the third dimension. So depending on where you are leveraging AWS across these three dimensions, the cost savings are different, and the mechanics of getting those savings are also different.
All right, so to just kind of summarize that, so we have these advisories from AWS, like GPT-2 versus GPT-3, and they come out with this big advisory, but the long and the short of it is, in almost all cases, it's worth making this switch. Or with the S3 intelligent tiering, that there's almost no reason not to turn that on, but yet we don't do it for whatever reason. So you're saying Cloudfix, if we just run Cloudfix, it's going to tell us to do that, and then we hit the button and it'll do it? Is that what we're saying here?
Pretty much. That's exactly what it's meant to do. They're completely non-destructive, super simple recommendations that just maintain health and hygiene of your accounts based on recommendations that AWS makes.
So this is basically money on the table. Doesn't affect the end user. Doesn't affect the performance of the application in any way. It's just literally just doing it better.
Yeah, that's basically what it is.
Well, no, can't complain about that. All right. Well, here is a follow-up question, and it's kind of a funny one. So we talk about saving money on our AWS bills, and we want to help other people save. Well, the question is, what does AWS think about that? Don't they want us to use more and more and more compute and not save money, or what's their perspective on this?
So in my experience, having worked so closely with AWS, the one thing that most people kind of miss is that AWS is and Amazon in general is probably one of the most customer success-oriented companies out there. They want you to be successful, because if you are successful and you love AWS as a service, you're going to use more of it. So they go out of their way to help you optimally use resources. So I think I have never come across anyone at AWS that said, "Oh, we'd love for you to waste your resources so we can make more money." They will come to you, they will take the initiative to come and tell you about where you might be wasting money and ask you to optimize it. they have invested so much in the well-architected framework. They've invested so much in all of these tools. Like if you just look at the advisories that AWS puts out around cost, they are phenomenal. They build tools like savings plans. They build tools like S3 intelligent tiering. They built all these infrequent access tiers across all of these managed services, including DynamoDB and so on. They do all this engineering for you so that you can save money and you can utilize the right resources for the right workloads. That's what they want you to do. They want you to do things in the most efficient manner. They do not want you to waste money. So I have never in my experience met anyone from AWS who's come to me and said, we love the fact that you're wasting so much money. It meets my sales quota or whatever mechanics that they have internally. I have never heard them do that. Instead, I've heard them come back and say, hey, you guys are wasting a ton of money. Why are you doing it? What can we do to help you save all that money and so that you're utilizing them in the right way? That's what they are motivated.
All right. So in the end of the day, if us as customers feel like we're getting good utilization, then we're going to keep coming back for more and more. And that's their long-term strategy. So if we're using them more efficiently in the short run, we're going to end up giving them more money in the long run. And so, but it's a win for everyone because we're being efficient. They're helping us be efficient. It's a win for everyone.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone.
Okay. Fantastic. That can't complain about that. We have another question from the audience. I think we should kind of wrap up the cloud fixed part of this and just go to general AWS questions. So please, everyone in the audience, keep the questions coming in terms of general chat. Let's do a trend. Please just put in any AWS questions. We've got one from Curtis Young. Let's put this up on the screen. Let's give this a shot. This is a good question. So AWS has been heavily focused on an automation approach for information security to improve scalability. Do we have any insights regarding currently available security automation vectors that can be taken within AWS now?
Yeah, so actually there's just so many of them. There's of course the entire well-architected framework that lays out all the dimensions around information security that you should actually take the time to understand and architect your applications accordingly. In terms of access and permission schemes, AWS takes a shared security model approach with their side of things, which is primarily around the IAM, where they basically take a zero trust policy where they start with saying you have permissions to do nothing, and you have to explicitly grant permissions for whatever access you might want someone to have. So I think understanding that whole permissions and access mechanism is going to be critical for you to build your solution that has the right security, the security parameters in place. On top of that, AWS has a ton of very interesting services that actually help you filter out potential issues. So just for example, for almost all of our groups, we try and make sure that we never, ever have to deal with PII, for example, right? That's something that as much as possible, we would never ever want to touch. We never want to get it. We never want to deal with it. So AWS has a bunch of tools where any data that's coming into our AWS accounts, whether it be Macy, whether it be Comprehend, and AWS just last week announced a new, it announced GA for Glue supporting PII redaction out of data or being able to deal with PII data. The Glue ETL tool itself has built-in capabilities that allows you to filter out all this PII data. So AWS has a bunch of these tools that you should look to leverage so that you never have to deal with a lot of these in the first place. And again, you'll find a lot of this in your AWS's well-architected framework, where the decision-making framework about how you architect your application for the right levels of security compliance, I think it's something that you should go through and deep dive into. I think it's time well spent.
Well, I've used to work in medical data, and I think it's best to treat PII like this hot potato. If you don't want to be holding on to it. You want to get it to AWS as fast as you can, because it's the liability associated with it. You want to leverage the fact that AWS has a lot of other people sharing in that investment in not messing this up.
Yep. Sorry, Badri, you're going to add something.
Just the one thing to what you said. Trusted advisor is useful. The only problem with trusted advisor has 10 times as many security advisories as it does cost savings. That's the only problem. I mean, that's the good and bad of it. Is it probably contains everything you need to know, but you need to go through like 100,000 end line items there. But it does have a severity rating, which is pretty useful. So I'd start there. I mean, talking of tools that are available. Right after the well-architected framework, the trusted advisor is a good place to go look at issues that you could be running into.
Oh, thank you, Badri, and then and also thank you for our audience. Keep putting those questions in the chat. We have probably about 3 or 4 more minutes of Q&A, and then we want to do that hoodie drawing and wrap up. We want to respect your time. It's been about 50 minutes. We'll wrap up right at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Here's another question that I think is interesting and worth thinking about here. Post this to the screen. This one came up earlier on the comments, and now it's time to look at this. Here we go. Here's a good one. We've been advised to look into a multi-cloud strategy in case something happens to Amazon or to Google or to Microsoft. So what do we think about this multi-cloud approach? Do we have to hedge our bets against AWS pulling the plug, or what do we think?
So let me take a first pass at it, and then I'll let Badri add his thoughts. I think the multi-cloud strategy comes from a very traditional view of procurement, where you're worried about one of your suppliers or your vendors going out of business, and then you basically hedged your bet by going with multiple vendors, or at least getting multiple quotes, and then figuring out how to mitigate those risks. The cloud is a completely different game, and those traditional procurement strategies don't really work. I think most people don't realize that between Google and Amazon servers, you probably have a vast majority of today's internet traffic move through their servers. And if Amazon or Google or one of those top 3 providers were to go down, you have larger problems in the world than just your application not working for that small amount of time. AWS has probably one of the largest teams working on building out data centers across the world, and the kind of redundancies that they have is not just one data center. Every availability zone is a series of data centers that work together. A region is built up of multiple availability zones. You then have 20 plus regions across the world. So you can, again, back to the well-architected framework, you can architect your application to have all the redundancies that are required to deal with whatever disaster recovery scenario you need to work through. Just think of it this way: if Amazon.com doesn't really ever go down, okay, or how many times have we experienced Amazon.com go down? They've built all the redundancies and disaster recoveries that they need. And so if you needed that level of redundancy for your applications, you can absolutely build it on a provider like AWS, or technically even Google or Microsoft. I would really question the need to go to multi-cloud, because that just adds a ton of complexity in the way you design your applications and build them up. And more often than not, you have to resort to the least common denominator of services, which is literally the compute and the raw storage. And you have to build everything else on top of it. So unless you have a real use case, and I've rarely come across one that has made sense, but unless you have a real absolute need that even the likes of Amazon, AWS or Amazon can't satisfy, then sure, go for it. But in 99.9% of the cases, I don't think you need to go down a multi-cloud strategy.
I think that's trying to be more redundant than what AWS, who couldn't possibly have a bigger interest in being redundant and reliable. If unless you really are convinced that you can do better, you're saying stick with them and let them work that out. I mean, they have every reason in the world to. Would that be a fair summary?
Absolutely.
Badri, do you have any more thoughts on this one?
No, I think I agree with that. The one thing I'd add is what we've seen is even folks who decide they need to do multi-cloud for whatever reason. I think one of the things good frameworks that I've seen is you find out, is it real multi-cloud or fake multi-cloud? Effectively, if you ran the same thing in 3 different clouds or 3 different regions within the same cloud, but your Keep Alive was running in AWS US East 1, then you're only as reliable as that link. And now suddenly that thing goes down and everything went down anyway, irrespective of how many other things you were running. So that's one. The other one is find out what's the cost of being multi-cloud. I think what I've seen it translate to being done is folks want to run everything in Kubernetes so that they think they can deploy it anywhere. Again, first, is that real or not? Can you really deploy it anywhere? And second, what are you not doing because of that? What are you not shipping because you chose to do that instead of running, say, SageMaker or Google AI or whatever it is? So there is the opportunity cost of trying to be multi-cloud, which should be measured in terms of feature velocity as well. So those are 2 things I'd watch out for.
Oh, so that's a great stretch. So you're saying with multi-cloud, you really are reduced down to simple compute and storage. You're reinventing all those higher order building blocks yourself and not leveraging the ones that are specific to each provider. And you have some single point of failures that you just can't get around anyway. So it'd be really hard to make the argument that it's worth it.
Right. And I think the last point worth making is transfer costs. Transfer costs are high between clouds. And I think Rahul's team had a great infographic. I don't know if we have the link that we can post on the show notes here that described AWS transfer costs. I've seen some crazy strategies as well, like folks trying to do host compute in GCP and storage in AWS. And the transfer costs them more than the data itself. So,
all right, well, we have one last question that maybe we can spend 30 seconds on, and then we're going to give away that hoodie and call it a show. S3 is good for hosting data lakes. We can get very pricey. What recommendations do we have? Maybe 30 seconds. Badri, what do you think? S3. How do we save that data science cost?
Actually, if you use S3 native tools such as intelligent tiering properly, particularly with what they announced at reInvent 2021, which was the instant glacier tier, I call it. I think AIA is the acronym for it. But a useful frame of reference here is if you're spending more than $100 per terabyte per year on S3, you're doing it wrong.
That's a great rule of thumb. $100 per terabyte per year, max. All right, I'm posting that in the chat as a good rule of thumb. So if you're crossing that threshold, you need to reevaluate. Rahul, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think like Badri just said, using the tools that are available from AWS, like the S3 intelligent tiering, getting to the right infrequent access layer. Because when you have data lakes, a lot of that data is just sitting over there for a long time. And you may not actually be accessing a large part of the data. And so it makes sense to move them to other infrequent access tiers. And you should be able to reduce your costs quite substantially by doing that. Keeping everything in standard tier, is literally the wrong way to do it if you have a large data lake. And the rule of thumb that you had is just perfect.
Oh, thank you. All right, well, we want to wrap up. First, we want to do that little drawing for all the people who've commented to see who wins the CloudFix hoodie. Let's give this a try quickly, and we'll hit draw. And it will be, hey, all right. Well, we will get that out to you. Congratulations. And just wanted to thank everyone. It was a really fun live stream. Thank you, Badri, Rahul. And again, thank you to our interpreters, Stephanie and Rachel. I really appreciate your being here. Thank you for the comments. And we will see you for the next one. We'll see you again at the same time next week. Have a nice afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you are. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.